I have held 3,412 hearts in my hands. Not beating, still, silent, emptied of blood and story, laid open on my autopsy table like books whose final chapters I'd been hired to read. I know the weight of a healthy heart, the color of a damaged one, the precise texture of tissue that has been poisoned, starved, broken by violence or time. I know that the heart is just a muscle. That love is not located in the chest but in the brain, in chemicals, in the stories we tell ourselves about the people who stay. But I also know that when my husband placed his hand over my heart at night, claiming to check my pulse, I felt safer than I had any right to feel. I felt loved. I felt seen. I was wrong about all of it. My name is Alina Voss. I'm 41. I'm a forensic pathologist for the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office in Chicago. I determine how people die, not why. That's for detectives and priests, but how? The mechanism, the chemistry, the physics of a life ending. I met Richard at a trial. He was an expert witness for the defense in an insurance fraud case, testifying that a woman's accidental drowning was actually suicide, voiding her family's claim. I was testifying for the prosecution, pointing out inconsistencies in the autopsy that suggested homicide. We disagreed professionally, argued over coffee afterward, and by the end of the week, he was sending flowers to my office with notes about irresistible evidence. He was charming in a way that made you feel intelligent for being charmed. He remembered details, my favorite wine, the name of my first cadaver in medical school, the way I took my coffee. He planned dates with the precision of a military operation. Dinner at 6, walk by the lake at 8, dessert at the place that stayed open late just for us. He listened. He asked questions. He made me feel like the most interesting person in any room. I was 28 and exhausted. Medical school, residency, fellowship. I'd spent 15 years becoming the kind of doctor who could hold a heart and read its secrets. I'd had relationships that ended because I worked too much, because I talked about death at dinner, because I couldn't pretend that the world was kind or that love was simple. Richard didn't ask me to pretend. He asked me to explain. He wanted to know how I did what I did, why I chose this work, what I felt when I opened a body and found the story written in tissue. I love that you see everything, he told me once, lying in bed with his hand on my chest, feeling my heartbeat. Most people look away from the hard things. You look directly at them. That's rare, that's precious. I married him 9 months later. I was pregnant with Sophie by our first anniversary. Richard was a life insurance broker. He sold policies the way some people sell hope, with statistics, with empathy, with the quiet assurance that he was protecting families from the worst day of their lives. He was good at it. Top salesman in his firm 3 years running. He understood grief, he told me. Understood how to talk to people who just lost someone, how to help them see that financial security was the last gift the dead could give. He took out a policy on me 6 months after we married. Standard procedure, he said, sliding the papers across our kitchen table. If something happens to you, I need to be able to raise Sophie without worrying about money. And vice versa, I have one too. We're protecting each other. I signed without reading. I trusted him. That was my first mistake, though not my last. Sophie was born when I was 30. She was perfect, 10 fingers, 10 toes. The furious cry of a person who has just discovered that the world is cold and bright, and not at all what she expected. Richard wept when he held her. Real tears, I thought. I photographed them, kept the image on my phone for years, evidence of a love I believed was genuine. He was attentive during my pregnancy, obsessive after. He tracked my nutrition, my sleep, my exercise. He administered my vitamins personally, crushing them into smoothies when I complained about the size. He scheduled my postpartum checkups, drove me to every appointment, asked the doctors questions I hadn't thought to ask. You're so protective, I told him once, amused. You're my world, he said. Both of you, I can't lose you. I thought it was love. I know now it was inventory management. The symptoms started when Sophie was 5. Fatigue first, bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. Then nausea, random and unpredictable, sometimes so severe I couldn't stand. Palpitations, my heart racing or skipping or pounding against my ribs like it wanted out. Confusion, moments where I'd forget words, names, why I'd walked into a room. Richard was immediately concerned. He made appointments with specialists, accompanied me to every visit, took notes in a leather journal he kept specifically for my care. The first cardiologist found nothing. The second suggested stress. The third, recommended by Richard, a colleague's friend, ran advanced tests and found irregularities. Cardiomyopathy, he said, showing me images I didn't understand. Rare, progressive, not immediately life-threatening, but you'll need medication for the rest of your life. And you'll need to be careful, no strenuous activity, regular monitoring. Richard held my hand. He looked devastated, the way a good actor looks devastated, eyes wet. Voice thick, the perfect performance of a husband receiving terrible news. "I'll take care of you," he said. "Whatever you need, I'm here." He was. He administered my medications personally, morning and evening, making sure I took them with food, tracking my doses in his journal. He accompanied me to every follow-up, every blood draw, every EKG. He was the perfect caregiver, the devoted husband, the man who loved his sick wife so much he couldn't bear to leave her side. I was grateful. I was also dying, though I didn't know it yet. I discovered the truth by accident. Professional habit, really. I was reviewing a case file for a colleague, a suspected homicide by poisoning. The victim was an elderly man, ostensibly dead of heart failure, but his caregiver had recently taken out multiple life insurance policies, and his toxicology showed elevated cardiac glycosides. I was reading the toxicology report, comparing it to the autopsy findings, when something caught my eye. The symptoms: fatigue, nausea, arrhythmia, confusion, the same constellation I'd been experiencing for 3 years. The same symptoms my cardiomyopathy produced. I pulled up my own medical records. I had access, I worked in the same system, my files were digital, my passwords current. I compared my lab results to the poisoning victims. The patterns were similar. Not identical, my levels were lower. Chronic rather than acute, but similar enough to make my hands shake on the keyboard. I didn't confront Richard. I was a forensic pathologist. I knew the value of evidence over emotion. I knew that if he was poisoning me, any reaction from me could accelerate his timeline. I knew that the medications he administered so carefully might be the weapon, and that refusing them might be more dangerous than taking them. So I pretended. I continued to accept his pills, smoothies, his attentive care, but I stopped swallowing. I palmed the tablets, hid them in my cheek, spit them into tissues when he wasn't looking. I dumped the smoothies when his back was turned, rinsed the cups to hide the evidence. I acted weak, confused, grateful, the same performance he'd been giving me for years, and I built a case. I started with my own blood. I'd saved samples from previous checkups, professional habit, the pathologist's instinct to preserve evidence. I tested them myself in the lab where I worked after hours when no one was watching. I found digitoxin in every sample, not therapeutic levels, not trace amounts. Progressive doses, increasing over 3 years, consistent with chronic poisoning designed to mimic cardiac disease. I tested the medications Richard gave me. The pills in the bottles labeled with my name, prescribed by the cardiologist Richard had found. They contained digitoxin, not the medication I was supposed to be taking, but the poison that was killing me. The real medication was probably in Richard's possession or destroyed or never purchased. The pills I took were death, dressed in pharmaceutical packaging. I found the insurance policies. Not the one I'd signed, that was for $500,000, reasonable, standard. But 4 additional policies, totaling $5 million, taken out over 2 years, with beneficiaries including Sophie but primarily directed to an offshore account in the Bahamas. I traced the account through public records, through Richard's email. He was careless with passwords, used our anniversary, the fool, and found communications with a man named Marcus Webb, discussing the timeline, her deterioration, and the final dose. I read those emails in my office at 2 a.m., surrounded by the dead, and I felt something I hadn't felt since my first autopsy, the absolute clinical certainty that I was looking at evidence of a crime. The victim was me. The perpetrator was my husband. The weapon was love or its performance, administered daily with a smile. I didn't cry, I made a list. The list grew. I was a forensic pathologist. I understood patterns, timelines, the behavior of predators. I started looking at Richard's history. His first marriage, brief, ended when his wife died of heart failure at 32. I'd known this, of course. He told me tearfully about his tragic past, how losing her had made him appreciate every moment. I hadn't known that she'd shown the same symptoms I had, that her death certificate was signed by a doctor who was later disbarred for insurance fraud, that Richard had collected $2 million in insurance, the maximum allowed then, and used it to start his career. I found a college girlfriend, too. Respiratory complications Richard had mentioned once in passing. But her autopsy, I requested it through professional channels, claiming a research interest showed cardiac glycosides in her system. Not enough to prove homicide, not then, not with the testing available, but enough in retrospect to suggest a pattern. 3 women, 3 natural deaths, 3 insurance payouts. And Sophie, my daughter, who Richard had recently started discussing in terms of future security and trust funds, and what happens if something happens to both of us. I understood then that I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting for Sophie's. Richard would use her grief, her inheritance, her trust, the same way he'd used my love. He would be the grieving father, the devoted widower, the man who'd lost so much and deserved so much more. And Sophie would grow up grateful to him, dependent on him, never knowing that her mother's death was a transaction and her trust fund was blood money. I couldn't let that happen. But I also couldn't simply arrest him, testify against him, expose him in a way that would destroy Sophie's world. She was 11. She adored her father. She believed, with the absolute faith of childhood, that he was good and kind and that her mother was sick but loved. I needed to show her the truth without destroying her. I needed to survive without becoming the paranoid wife, the hysterical patient, the woman who cried wolf and was disbelieved. I needed to be the forensic pathologist I was trained to be, precise, patient, absolutely certain before I spoke. I spent 3 years preparing. 3 years of palming pills, of faking symptoms, of letting Richard believe I was deteriorating while I grew stronger. 3 years of documenting, preserving, building a case so airtight that not even his charm could escape it. And I spent those years watching him watch me die. He was so pleased, so quietly satisfied. He held my hand during bad days, days I performed for him, days I pretended to be weaker than I was, and I felt his thumb on my pulse, counting my heartbeat like a merchant counting coins. "You're so brave," he'd say, "so strong. I don't know what I'd do without you." I knew exactly what he'd do. He'd collect $5 million, console our daughter, and find another woman to insure. Another heart to hold in his hands until it stopped. I wasn't going to let him. Richard announced the trip on Sophie's 11th birthday. A family vacation to the Bahamas, one last trip before Alina gets too sick to travel. He'd booked a resort, private beach, the kind of place where rich people go to die discreetly. "I want it to be special," he said, holding my hand across the dinner table while Sophie blew out candles, "for all of us. Memories we can hold on to." I looked at Sophie, her face lit by candlelight, and I thought of what Richard was planning. The final dose in his emails, the private beach where no one would hear me call for help. The foreign medical system where death certificates were easier to obtain, where natural causes were less scrutinized, where a grieving husband could fly home with his daughter and his millions before anyone asked questions. "I'd love that," I said, squeezing his hand. "One last trip, together." I started my final preparations that night. I contacted a colleague, Dr. James Okonkwo, a toxicologist I'd worked with for years, someone who owed me favors and asked no questions. I explained what I needed: an antidote for digitoxin poisoning, something that could counteract a lethal dose if administered quickly. Something I could take preventively, that wouldn't show up in standard blood work, that Richard wouldn't recognize. James didn't ask why. He just said, "This is dangerous, Alina. The antidote has its own risks. And if he's giving you what I think he's giving you, the margin between survival and death is narrow." "I know," I said. "I've spent 15 years measuring that margin in other people. I need to survive this." James, not just for me, for my daughter. He sent me the antidote in unmarked vials. I practiced injecting myself, subcutaneous, fast, hidden. I calculated the timing, the dosage, the window of opportunity. I was preparing for the most important autopsy of my career, my own, prevented. I also prepared the evidence. I made copies of everything: the blood tests, the emails, the insurance policies, the bank records. I sent them to 3 different lawyers, to James, to a safety deposit box Sophie would inherit if I died. I created a video, me in my office in professional clothes, explaining everything calmly, clinically, the way I'd explain any case. "If you're watching this," I said, "I'm either dead or Richard has been arrested. Either way, Sophie, this is the truth. Your father poisoned me. He poisoned 2 women before me. He planned to profit from my death. And I spent 3 years making sure he couldn't." I didn't send the video to anyone. I just made it, just in case. We flew to the Bahamas 3 weeks later. Richard was attentive during the flight, monitoring my vitals with a blood pressure cuff he carried in his carry-on, making sure I took my medication at the scheduled times. I took the pills, palmed them, disposed of them in the airplane bathroom. I let him believe I was compliant. I let him believe I was dying. The resort was beautiful, white sand, turquoise water, the kind of place where reality feels optional. Richard had booked the presidential suite with a private beach and a personal chef. For privacy, he said, so you can rest. And so we can be alone, I added, just family. Just family, he agreed, smiling. Sophie loved it. She built sandcastles, collected shells, swam until her skin was brown and her hair was full of salt. She was happy in a way that broke my heart because I knew what was coming, knew that her happiness was built on a lie that was about to collapse. Richard planned the final dinner for our anniversary, 10 years of marriage. He called it, though we'd been married 11. He'd arranged a private table on the beach, candles, champagne, the romantic setting where I'd pass peacefully from heart failure brought on by my condition. He'd even arranged for Dr., a local physician who'd signed death certificates for him before, according to his emails, to be nearby in case of emergency. I let him plan. I let him believe, and I made my own arrangements. I contacted the resort's AV technician, a young woman named Keisha who was studying forensic science online and thrilled to meet a real pathologist. I explained that I was documenting a family medical situation and needed access to the beach's projection system. She gave me the codes, no questions asked, starstruck by the authority of my credentials. I contacted emergency services, anonymously, from a disposable phone and reported a probable cardiac emergency at the private beach, just in case. I gave them Richard's name, my name, the resort's address. I told them to bring body cameras, that this was a sensitive situation. And I prepared Sophie. Not with the full truth, she was 11, she deserved some protection, but with enough. I told her that Mommy had been investigating something important, that Daddy might have done something very wrong, and that I needed her to be brave and observant during dinner. No matter what happens, I said, holding her hands, I love you, and I will always tell you the truth, even when it's hard. She looked at me with eyes that were too old for 11. Is Daddy bad? I think he's done bad things, I said carefully, and I think it's important that we see them clearly. Can you do that? Can you watch and remember and know that whatever happens, I'm here? She nodded, solemn, scared, trusting me in a way that Richard had never deserved. The dinner was perfect. Richard had outdone himself, lobster, champagne, the sunset painting the sky in colors that would have been beautiful if I hadn't known what they framed. He wore the suit he'd worn at our wedding. He'd even brought the same cufflinks, the ones I'd given him, a gesture of sentiment that would have moved me once. To us, he said, raising his glass to 10 years, to the future. I raised my glass but didn't drink. Sophie, baby, come join us, I want you here for this. Richard frowned just slightly. This is our moment, Elena. Sophie I want her here, I said, and my voice was stronger than it had been in years, strong enough to surprise him. She's part of us, part of our story. I want her to hear what I have to say. He hesitated, then smiled, the smile of a man who thinks he controls the narrative. Of course. Sophie, come sit with Mommy. Sophie joined us, sitting on my right, small and straight-backed and watchful. Richard raised his glass again, to family, to truth, I corrected, and I pressed the button on the remote in my pocket. The beach's projection screen lit up. Richard's emails appeared, large, clear, undeniable. The communications with Marcus Webb. The discussions of timeline and final dose. Insurance policies, the offshore account, the $5 million he stood to collect when I died. Richard's face went white. What is this? Elena, what have you? This is evidence, I said calmly, the way I'd present findings in court. Of your attempt to murder me. Of your successful murders of your first wife and your college girlfriend. Of your plan to profit from my death and control our daughter's inheritance. I stood up. I was steady, strong, the antidote coursing through my system, my heart beating with the regular rhythm of a healthy woman who had never been sick. I've been documenting this for 3 years, Richard. Every pill you gave me, every email you sent, every dollar you moved. I have blood tests showing digitoxin in my system. I have the original medications, which contain poison rather than treatment. I have everything. Richard stood too fast, knocking over his chair. You're delusional, you're sick. This is your illness talking. My illness was manufactured by you, I said. I don't have cardiomyopathy, Richard. I have a husband who tried to kill me slowly, who administered poison with a smile, who held my hand while he counted my remaining heartbeats. Sophie was crying now, silent tears, but she didn't look away. She watched her father with eyes that were seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, and I knew that whatever happened next, she would remember this. She would know that her mother fought, that she told the truth, that she refused to be erased. Richard reached for his pocket, for his phone, for help, for an escape. But I had one more thing. I pulled out the vial of antidote, the one James had given me, and I held it up. I took this an hour ago, Richard. Whatever you plan to give me tonight, and I know you plan something, I read your emails, it won't work. I'm not going to die on this beach. I'm not going to be your third victim. He lunged at me, or at the vial, or at the screen, or at the life that was slipping away from him. I sidestepped, I'd practiced, I'd prepared, I was not the weak woman he'd believed me to be, and he stumbled, fell to his knees in the sand, the perfect image of a man whose performance had finally ended. The paramedics arrived then, sirens distant but growing, summoned by my anonymous call. They found Richard on his knees, me standing, Sophie between us, the projection still showing his crimes. They checked my vitals, normal, healthy, strong, and Richard's, which showed traces of digitoxin in his system. He'd been immunizing himself, I realized, building tolerance, but not enough. The poison he'd planned for me had marked him too. He was arrested that night. Extradited to the United States, where the exhumations of his previous wives confirmed what I'd suspected. He was tried for murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and sentenced to life without parole. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was in therapy with Sophie, learning how to be a mother who had survived, how to be honest without being cruel, how to rebuild trust in a world where the person she loved most had tried to kill me. That was 3 years ago. I'm 41 now. My heart is healthy, healthier than it's been in a decade, now that the poison is gone. I have a scar on my arm from the antidote injections, a permanent reminder of what I survived. I don't hide it. I show it to Sophie when she asks, which is often, and I tell her, this is where Mommy chose to live. Sophie is 14. She's in therapy, which she calls talking about my feelings to a stranger who charges too much but which she attends faithfully. She has trust issues, understandably. She trusted her father completely, and he was a lie. She tests me constantly, asking the same questions in different ways, checking for inconsistencies, waiting for me to prove myself as false as he was. I don't prove false. I prove present. Every day, every question, every hard conversation. I show her my medications, the real ones, prescribed by doctors I chose, purchased from pharmacies with seals intact. I take them in front of her. I explain what they are, why I need them, what they do. Transparency. I tell her, you never have to wonder if I'm lying to you, about anything, ever. She asked me once, about a year after Richard's arrest, do you hate him? I thought about it. Really thought, the way I think about autopsy findings, weighing evidence, considering all angles. I don't hate him, I said finally. Hate requires energy I need for other things. I think I understand him in a way that frightens me. He saw people as investments, as policies to be collected on. He loved the idea of love more than he loved any person. And I think I paused, choosing honesty over comfort. I think I loved a version of him that didn't exist. A performance. A character he played for me and for himself. Did you ever love the real him? I don't know if there was a real him, I admitted. I don't know if there was anything underneath the performance. And that's the saddest thing I can say about another person. Sophie nodded, processing. Then I'm glad you're not dead. Me too, baby, me too. I left forensic pathology 2 years ago. Not because I lost my taste for the work, I still believe in the importance of speaking for the dead, of finding truth in tissue and chemistry. But I needed to speak for the living. For women who suspected they were being poisoned, controlled, erased by the people who claimed to love them. I opened a clinic called Second Opinion. Not a hospital, something smaller, more intimate. A place where a woman can say, I think my husband is making me sick, and be believed. Where we run tests, document findings, connect women with lawyers and therapists in safe housing. Where the first response is not are you sure, or have you considered stress, but let's find out. Sophie works there on weekends. Not as a medical professional, she's 14, she files papers and makes coffee and listens. But she listens well, better than most adults. Women tell her things they don't tell me, things about fear and shame and the slow erosion of self that happens when someone controls your body while claiming to care for it. Why do they tell me? She asked once, after a woman in her 30s had confided in her about a husband who monitored her food, her weight, her medications. Because you survived, I said. Because you watched your mother survive. Because you're proof that the story can change, even when it seems like it's already written. She thought about this. Is that why you tell your story, to be proof? I tell my story because silence is what predators depend on, I said. Richard counted on me being too grateful, too trusting, too sick to question him. Every woman who speaks up makes it harder for the next Richard to operate. Every story told is a light turned on in a dark room. even if it's scary, especially if it's scary. Sophie is dating now, a girl from her school, a musician with purple hair and a laugh that makes Sophie smile in a way I haven't seen since before Richard's arrest. She's careful with her heart, slower to trust than her peers, but she's learning that not everyone performs love. Some people just feel it, messy and real and without script. She calls me Alina sometimes, Mom others. Both are true, both are earned. When she has nightmares about the beach, the dinner, her father on his knees in the sand, I sit with her until morning. I don't tell her to be brave. I tell her that fear is information, that her body is trying to keep her safe, that listening is a choice. I'm 41. I'm alive when I should be dead. I'm a mother who survived, a doctor who changed specialties, a woman who learned that the most important autopsy is the one you perform on your own life, cutting away the lies until you find the truth underneath. Richard is in prison. He writes letters I don't read. He has a podcast now apparently about wrongful conviction, about the dangers of believing women, about how he was a devoted husband destroyed by a paranoid wife. 12 listeners, someone told me, I don't check, I don't need to know. What I need to know is this: Sophie is safe, I am healthy. The women who come to second opinion find, if not justice, at least belief. At least a place where someone listens, where someone sees, where someone refuses to look away from the hard things. I'm Alina, I'm 41. I'm a forensic pathologist who held her own heart in her hands and chose to keep it beating. I'm a wife who learned that love can be a weapon, and a mother who is learning, day by day, that truth can be a shelter. And if you're listening to this, if someone is holding your hand while they count your heartbeats, if someone is administering your care while they profit from your decline, hear me. The body remembers. The body keeps evidence. And the woman who learns to read her own story, who trusts her own symptoms, who refuses to be told she's imagining things, she is the most dangerous thing a predator can face. Trust yourself. Document everything. And when you're ready, speak. See you in the next story.